My parents created a monster in my perfect sister who tried to kill Dad when they finally saw her truth. I woke to something crawling across my face, a spider placed by my sister because I wouldn't give her my grandmother's watch. That night, I learned the truth. Behind Madison's angelic smile lived a monster my parents couldn't or wouldn't see. I've always been the invisible daughter, the one who brings home straight A's only to have them taped to the refrigerator without ceremony, while Madison's C+ earns a celebration dinner. I'm Hannah, 23 years old and still living in the shadow of my perfect little sister. Madison entered our world like a supernova 5 years after me, instantly becoming the center of our family's universe. My parents, David and Susan Mitchell, transformed from reasonable adults into devoted worshipers at the altar of their miracle baby. Hannah, why can't you be more patient with your sister? Mom would sigh whenever I complained about Madison taking my things without asking. She looks up to you, Dad would add, as if that explained everything. What they never saw was the smile that crept across Madison's face when their backs were turned, that knowing smirk of victory. I didn't always resent her. There was a time when I adored my baby sister, volunteered to feed her, read her bedtime stories. I thought having a sister meant having a best friend. How painfully wrong I was. I later learned why Madison was treated like royalty. Before her, Mom had suffered a miscarriage. They never spoke about it directly to me, but I overheard them one night. "We can't be too hard on her," Mom whispered to Dad. "She's our miracle, our second chance." Their grief transformed Madison into something untouchable, sacred. Meanwhile, I became the practical one, the responsible one, the one who could handle disappointment because I wasn't made of glass. The first time I truly saw beneath Madison's angelic facade was on my 16th birthday. Grandma had given me her vintage watch, a delicate gold timepiece that had been in our family for generations. "It's beautiful," I whispered, carefully fastening it around my wrist. Madison's eyes followed my every movement. "Can I wear it?" she demanded, already reaching for my arm. "Not right now," I said gently. "It's very special and very old." Her face darkened. "But I want to. Maybe when you're older," I suggested. That evening, she cried to our parents. "Hannah won't share, she's so selfish." To my surprise, Dad shook his head. "Princess, that's Grandma's special gift to Hannah. You'll get your own someday." Madison's tantrum escalated, but for once they didn't cave. I should have known she wouldn't let it go. That night, I woke to something tickling my cheek. At first, I thought it was a strand of hair, but the sensation moved deliberately across my skin. I opened my eyes to darkness, heart pounding against my ribs. When I finally found the lamp switch, I screamed. A large brown spider was crawling across my pillow, inches from my face. My parents rushed in. Dad quickly captured the spider while Mom comforted me. Madison appeared in the doorway, looking concerned. "Is Hannah okay?" she asked sweetly. After they left, she lingered. In the dim hallway light, her face transformed. Gone was the worry, replaced by cold satisfaction. "Next time," she whispered. "Don't be so greedy, Hannah." She slipped away, leaving me frozen with the terrible knowledge that my little sister wasn't just spoiled. She was something far more frightening. I tried convincing myself that the spider incident was just a one-time thing, a momentary lapse in Madison's judgment. Maybe she was just going through a phase, but deep down, I knew better. My sister was calculating, patient, and utterly merciless when crossed. The following year, I finally worked up the nerve to invite Mark Sutton over. We'd been lab partners in AP chemistry, and after months of stolen glances and nervous conversations, I'd managed to ask him to watch a movie at my house. To my shock and delight, he said yes. I spent days preparing. I cleaned the living room until it gleamed, selected my favorite rom-com, one that wouldn't seem too desperate, and even baked cookies from scratch. Mom raised an eyebrow at my sudden interest in housekeeping but said nothing. "You look pretty," she commented as I twirled in my floral dress, the one I'd saved 3 paychecks from my part-time job to buy. I caught Madison watching me from the hallway, her face unreadable. Something in her gaze made my stomach knot, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was my night. Mark arrived at 7, looking adorably nervous in a button-down shirt and jeans. We had just settled on the couch, the awkward small talk finally giving way to comfortable conversation, when Madison appeared with a tray. I thought you guys might want some juice, she said, her voice honeyed with fake sweetness. Before I could stop her, she tripped on the carpet edge, sending a full glass of cranberry juice across my lap. The cold liquid soaked through my dress immediately, staining the pale fabric a violent red. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Madison gasped, her eyes wide with manufactured horror. "It's fine," I managed, though it wasn't. "I'll just go change." I rushed upstairs, frantically searching for something else to wear. When I returned 10 minutes later in jeans and a t-shirt, the atmosphere had completely changed. Mark sat rigid on the edge of the couch, eyes fixed on the floor while Madison chatted away. "And then Hannah wet the bed until she was 12, she was saying. Mom had to put plastic sheets on her mattress." My face burned. "That's not true." Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. I should probably get going. I just remembered I have this thing." "You just got here," I protested weakly, but he was already standing up. "Yeah, sorry," he mumbled, heading for the door. As he left, Madison leaned close to me and whispered, "He could do better than you anyway." That night, I confronted my parents, tears streaming down my face. "She's doing these things on purpose. Why can't you see it?" Dad sighed, looking exhausted. "Hannah, she's just a kid. You're making too big a deal out of this." "You're the older sister," Mom added. "You need to be more understanding." That was the moment I realized nothing would change. In their eyes, Madison would always be the fragile miracle who could do no wrong, and I would always be expected to endure her cruelty with a smile. I threw myself into my studies with renewed determination, applying to colleges as far away as possible. When my acceptance letter from Northwestern arrived, I felt like I could finally breathe again. "You're moving to Chicago?" Mom asked, her tone suggesting I was abandoning them. "That's so far away." "That's the point," I replied, not bothering to hide my relief. Madison watched the conversation with narrowed eyes, saying nothing. But later, as I packed my belongings, she appeared in my doorway. "You think leaving will solve anything?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. "You can run away, Hannah, but you'll have to come back eventually. And I'll be waiting." I should have heeded her warning. Instead, I escaped to college, built a new life, and gradually reduced contact with my family to obligatory holiday calls. For 5 blissful years, I managed to avoid returning home. But when Dad's heart attack brought me rushing back, I realized Madison had been right all along. Some nightmares you can't outrun forever. And my sister had been patiently waiting, growing stronger in my absence, ready to make me pay for daring to leave. I was in the middle of preparing a presentation for my marketing team when my phone rang. Mom never called on weeknights, so seeing her name flash across my screen sent an immediate chill through me. "Hannah?" Her voice was thin, trembling. "It's your father. He's had a heart attack." My world stopped. Despite everything, the years of favoritism, the emotional distance, he was still my dad. "Is he?" I couldn't finish the sentence. "He's stable, but it was serious. The doctors say—" Her voice broke. "They say we were lucky." I booked the first flight home, my hands shaking as I packed an overnight bag. 5 years of carefully constructed distance collapsed in an instant. As the plane descended toward my hometown, I felt a familiar dread building in my chest. Madison would be there. There was no avoiding her now. Dad looked smaller somehow, lying in the hospital bed. His skin had a grayish pallor that frightened me more than I wanted to admit. Mom sat beside him, clutching his hand like it was a lifeline. And there was Madison, 23 now, watching me with those calculating eyes. "Hannah," Dad said weakly, his face lighting up. "You came." "Of course I did," I replied, swallowing the lump in my throat. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital visits and hushed conversations with doctors. When Dad was finally discharged, he seemed different, more reflective, less dismissive of my feelings. One evening, as we sat around the living room, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, life's too short for regrets." He looked around at all of us. "I want us to take a family vacation, somewhere nice. Just the 4 of us." Mom nodded enthusiastically. "That's a wonderful idea, David." I hesitated. A week trapped with Madison sounded like torture, but the hopeful look in Dad's eyes made it impossible to refuse. "Sure, Dad, that sounds great." Only Madison remained silent, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was the same smile she'd worn before putting the spider on my pillow, before ruining my date with Mark. A warning sign I'd learned to fear. Dad booked a Caribbean cruise, something he'd always wanted to do but had put off for someday. As the departure date approached, I found myself growing increasingly anxious. Madison had been suspiciously pleasant, which only heightened my unease. The morning of the trip arrived and we headed to the airport together. Dad seemed rejuvenated by the prospect of the vacation, chatting excitedly about the ship's amenities as we unloaded our luggage at the terminal. Everything seemed normal until we reached the check-in counter. "I'm sorry, but there appears to be a problem," the airline representative said, frowning at her screen. "We only have 3 tickets confirmed for your party." "That can't be right," Dad insisted. "I booked 4 tickets, one for each of us." The woman clicked through several screens. "According to our records, one reservation was canceled yesterday." She looked up apologetically. "For Hannah Mitchell." My stomach dropped as I turned to Madison. She wore an expression of perfect innocence, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. "There must be some mistake," Mom said, flustered. "I can check if there are any available seats on this flight," the representative offered, "but it's completely full. The next available flight isn't until tomorrow afternoon." "That's after our ship departs," Dad said, his shoulders slumping. I couldn't contain myself any longer. "Madison, what did you do?" I demanded. She widened her eyes in feigned shock. "Me? Why would you think I had anything to do with this?" "Because this is exactly the kind of thing you do," my voice rose, drawing stares from nearby travelers. "Hannah, calm down," Mom hissed. "You're making a scene." "It's probably just a computer error," Dad said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. "We could all go home," he suggested weakly. "Reschedule the whole trip." Mom shook her head. "David, you've been looking forward to this for weeks. The doctor said this vacation would be good for your recovery." She turned to me with a practiced expression of regret that didn't reach her eyes. "Hannah travels all the time for work. She'll understand." And just like that, it was decided. They would go without me. As they gathered their boarding passes, Madison brushed past me. "Have fun house-sitting," she whispered. "We'll send postcards." I stood frozen as they walked towards security, Dad glancing back with genuine regret, Mom already discussing dinner reservations on the ship, and Madison walking with the satisfied stride of someone who had orchestrated the perfect crime. Once again, I had been cast out. Once again, they had chosen her. But this time, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about a ruined vacation. This was about years of manipulation, of being treated like I was dispensable. As I walked back to the parking lot alone, I made a decision. Madison thought she had won, but she had no idea what was coming. Because this time, I wasn't going to walk away. This time, I was going to fight back. I flew back to San Francisco that same day, the taste of betrayal bitter in my mouth. My roommate, Jen, took one look at my face when I walked through the door and immediately opened a bottle of wine. "Family drama?" she asked, pouring me a generous glass. "You have no idea," I replied, sinking onto our couch. I spent the next few days throwing myself into work, staying late at the office and volunteering for projects nobody else wanted. Anything to keep my mind off the fact that my family was sailing through crystal blue waters without me, and by choice. Mom called every evening, her voice cheerful as she described their adventures. "The sunset tonight was just gorgeous, Hannah. You should see the pictures." Each time, Madison would inevitably appear in the background, waving at the camera with that self-satisfied smirk. "Miss you, sis," she'd call out, her voice dripping with false sincerity. I'd smile and nod, playing the role of the understanding daughter. What else could I do? After years of being the family scapegoat, I'd perfected the art of swallowing my feelings. "You should just tell them off," Jen suggested one night after witnessing one of these calls. "They literally abandoned you at the airport." "It's complicated," I said, though deep down I knew she was right. 4 days into their 7-day cruise, my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. Seeing Mom's name, I immediately sat up, fully awake. Late-night calls were never good news. "Hannah?" Her voice trembled with panic. "Something terrible has happened." My heart raced. "Is it Dad? Did he have another heart attack?" "No, not yet, but..." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "His medication is missing, the heart medication he absolutely has to take." "What do you mean, missing?" "We can't find it anywhere. We've torn apart the cabin. Some of his pills were in a daily organizer, but the rest of the bottle, it's just gone. The fear in her voice was palpable. Hannah, if he doesn't take his medication regularly, the doctor said he could have another attack, possibly worse than the last one. Have you talked to the ship's doctor? Yes, but we're in the middle of the ocean. They don't have the specific medication he needs. They've radioed ahead to have some waiting at our next port, but that's not until tomorrow afternoon. She paused. I don't know what to do. I felt a familiar sense of dread. Did you ask Madison if she's seen them? Of course, Mom snapped, defensive as always when it came to her precious younger daughter. She's been helping us search. The next evening, Mom called again. This time her voice was hollow, shocked. We found the pills, she said. That's great. Where were they? A long pause. In Madison's drawer, hidden under her clothes. My blood ran cold. What? Your father went to borrow a sweater from her. It's chilly on deck at night, and he found the pill bottle. Her voice broke. Hannah, I don't understand. Why would she do this? For the first time in my life, I heard genuine confusion in my mother's voice. The perfect facade of our family was finally cracking. She's always been like this, Mom, I said quietly. You just never wanted to see it. What happened next came to me in fragments through a series of increasingly frantic calls. Dad had confronted Madison, expecting denials or excuses. Instead, she exploded. You never loved me the way you loved her, she had screamed, according to Mom. You invited her on this trip. It was supposed to be just the three of us. She'd thrown things, a lamp, her hairbrush, anything within reach. When Dad tried to calm her down, she'd pushed him away so forcefully he stumbled backward. Hotel security had arrived first, followed by local police. Madison had been arrested for disturbing the peace and assault. And when Mom and Dad tried to bail her out the next morning, they discovered another shock. Their passports and most of their cash were missing from the cabin safe. We think she took them, Mom said, her voice small and defeated. The police found our room key in her pocket. The reality of the situation slowly dawned on me. My parents were stranded in a foreign country with limited funds, no identification, and a daughter in jail. And now they had only one person left to turn to, the daughter they'd left behind. Hannah, Mom said, desperation evident in every syllable. We need your help. A strange calm settled over me. For years, I'd been waiting for them to see Madison for who she really was. Now they finally had in the most dramatic way possible. I'll book a flight, I said. But when I get there, we need to talk. Really talk. About everything. For the first time in my adult life, Mom didn't argue or deflect. Yes, she agreed quietly. It's time we did. As I packed my bag for the second emergency trip in as many weeks, I felt no satisfaction in Madison's downfall, only a weary sense that perhaps, finally, healing might be possible. The call from my mother was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Her voice, typically composed and authoritative, now trembled with a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. Hannah, I know we have no right to ask. She paused, swallowing audibly. But we need your help. We're stranded. We have no passports, barely any money left. The embassy says it will take days to process emergency documents. I sat in silence, letting her words hang in the air. Part of me, the wounded child who had been overlooked for years, wanted to say no, to let them feel abandoned, just as I had countless times. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry for everything. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. I'll wire you enough money to cover the hotel and embassy fees. Text me the details. Thank you, she breathed. Hannah, when this is over, we need to talk. Really talk. Yes, I agreed. We do. 2 weeks later, they returned home with Madison in tow. I kept my distance, waiting for them to handle the situation they'd enabled for so long. Mom called almost daily with updates, her voice growing more distressed with each conversation. We told her she needs to leave, Mom said one evening. Your father was very clear. She has to find her own place. How did she take it? I asked, already knowing the answer. Not well. Mom's voice was hollow. She threw your father's laptop against the wall. She screamed that we were choosing you over her. She threatened to tell people we've been abusing her for years. And you believe her? That she'll follow through? Yes, Mom admitted quietly. She's not well, Hannah. I think she's always been this way, and we just didn't want to see it. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Madison refused to leave, turning their home into a battleground. She'd hide Dad's car keys, making him late for his appointments. She'd scream at all hours, disturbing the neighbors. She demanded Mom wait on her hand and foot, then threw tantrums when her demands weren't met perfectly. "I don't know what to do," Mom sobbed during one call. "She's holding us hostage in our own home." I finally drove over, unwilling to let this continue. My parents looked shell-shocked, moving through their own house like frightened mice. Madison glared at me from the staircase, her eyes cold with hatred. "You need to get legal help," I told them firmly. "She's an adult. You can have her legally removed from the property." "But the things she's threatening to say," Dad began. "Are lies," I finished. "And yes, lies can hurt. But living with this," I gestured around at the broken picture frames and upturned furniture, "is destroying you both." They resisted at first, still trapped in the cycle of guilt and manipulation Madison had perfected. But when she shoved Mom into a wall during an argument, something finally broke in Dad. The next day, he contacted a lawyer. The eviction notice was delivered a week later. Madison had 30 days to vacate the premises. "You can't do this to me," she shrieked, waving the papers in their faces. "I'll destroy you. I'll tell everyone what monsters you really are." But the legal machinery was in motion. If she didn't leave voluntarily, the sheriff would remove her by force. The final confrontation came 3 days before the deadline. I was on the phone with Mom when I heard shouting in the background, then a crash, then my mother's terrified scream. "Mom? Mom!" I yelled into the phone. "She has a knife," Mom whispered frantically. "Call 911, please." I hung up and dialed emergency services, then jumped in my car and sped toward their house, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I arrived, police cars were already in the driveway, lights flashing in the quiet suburban night. An officer stopped me at the door. Inside, I could see Madison being handcuffed, her face contorted with rage as she screamed obscenities at our parents. Dad sat on the couch, his face ashen, while a paramedic checked a cut on his arm. "She actually tried to stab him," Mom told me later, her voice numb with shock. "If he hadn't moved when he did?" Madison was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. At the arraignment, she stared at us from the defendant's table with eyes so filled with hatred it made my skin crawl. She looked like a stranger, or perhaps this was who she had always been, beneath the angelic facade our parents had allowed themselves to see. As we left the courthouse, Mom took my hand, something she hadn't done since I was a child. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself," she said softly, "for not protecting you, for not seeing." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But as we walked to the car together, I felt something long broken between us begin, ever so slightly, to mend. The weeks after Madison's arrest were quiet, as if the universe itself needed time to recover from the storm. My parents couldn't bear to return to their house immediately. Too many painful memories lingered in those walls, so they stayed with me in San Francisco. My small 2-bedroom apartment wasn't designed for 3 adults, but somehow the cramped quarters helped us navigate the uncomfortable conversations we needed to have. One night, after a simple dinner I'd prepared, we sat together on my tiny balcony overlooking the city lights. Dad cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly as he set down his wine glass. "Hannah," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I was wrong. For years I was wrong. I should have protected you." Mom reached across the table, tentatively taking my hand. Her eyes were red-rimmed from the tears she'd been shedding for days. I was blind, willfully blind. I wanted so badly to believe that Madison was... She trailed off, unable to finish. "Special?" I supplied. "Perfect? The miracle child who could do no wrong?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't get back the years we lost, but I want to try and rebuild if you'll let us." I didn't rush to reassure them. The wounds were too deep, the history too painful for platitudes. "I need more than words," I said finally. "I need to see real change." They nodded, accepting this boundary without argument, perhaps for the first time. Meanwhile, Madison faced the consequences of her actions. With no one left to manipulate, no one to shield her from reality, she was truly alone. Her preliminary hearing painted a clear picture of her instability. The judge denied bail, citing her as a danger to others. In a strange way, I pitied her. She'd been given everything, yet somehow ended up with nothing. No love, no connection, no future. Just rage and entitlement that had consumed her from within. I didn't visit her in jail. Some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes. As summer turned to fall, I watched my parents slowly, painfully rebuild their lives. They sold the house and bought a small condo closer to me. Dad volunteered at a heart health clinic. Mom joined a support group for parents of children with behavioral disorders. They didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, they tried to earn it through consistent, small actions. And me? I finally felt free. Free from being the forgotten daughter, the responsible one, the one who had to earn love that should have been freely given. Free from Madison's shadow and the weight of my parents' blindness. One evening, watching the fog roll in over the San Francisco skyline from my apartment window, I realized I was smiling. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Not because all was forgiven, it wasn't, not entirely. But because for the first time in my life, I was standing in my own light. And that was enough.